Hello, and welcome to the Imposter Syndrome Network Podcast, where everyone belongs, especially those of you who think you do not. We're all imposters here. My name is Chris Grundeman. I'm here with my remarkable co-host, Zoe Rose.
Hey.
This is the Justin Cohen episode, and I know we're all going to have a really good time. Justin is a technology professional based in Canada and focused on innovation. He is a techno generalist and an Uber geek. Hey, Justin, would you mind introducing yourself further to the Imposter Syndrome Network?
Hey, sure. Thanks, Chris. So my name is Justin Cohen. On Twitter, you can find me at CanTechIT, although some people say CanTechIt. That's fine. I'll take it. And I have been a sort of a technology generalist since I was a kid. And I have bounced around the industry wherever I could, I guess, sort of find a job or where the industry took me. So I've worked in a whole bunch of different areas within technology. And as a result, that's given me a lot of experience. But when you approached me about this podcast, I thought to myself, after really, I found that I was rereading the definition of imposter syndrome a bunch of times and said, is that really me? And I said to Zoe, I said, you know what? There's a whole bunch of stuff I've never talked about that really fits into that. So I said, yeah, let's talk about it.
Awesome. Well, cool. We'll try to dig into some of that. Thanks for being here. And first off, I guess, as you said, right, you've had a really, illustrious career at this point. I think you've been working in and around technology since the 90s. You've had various roles. And within all of that, right, looking back over that time so far, I'm curious, what's the favorite job that you've ever held?
I don't know that there's, it's hard to say like, oh, the one I have now is the favorite. But the one I have now really is the favorite. Like, this is the place that I've wanted to be my whole life. This is the thing that I wished I could always do, the thing that I was hoping for. So I know it sounds cliche to say the thing I'm doing now is my absolute favorite, but it really, really is. It's better than all of them. And I don't mean that in a bad way to the places I've been before. And we can get into why. But yeah, where I am now, so I work at Cisco Systems as my role is innovation architect. I'm responsible for the Toronto Cisco Innovation Lab facility in our programming, and it's legitimately the coolest job I've ever had.
I can also second that because I have been to his office. It is brilliant. If you want to go somewhere that has tons of toys and just randomly cool stuff, that is where to go.
That's awesome. I can see even in your home office here, you've got some cool toys on the wall. Obviously, no one listening can see this. Sorry. But definitely some really neat stuff there. Oh, and the lights are flashing. Very cool.
It lights up.
Yeah. So, when COVID happened and we were all stuck at home for a super long time, I decided, hey, this would be a really great time to finally get sort of my home office / studio done because we were doing a lot more video and a lot more audio. So I wanted sort of my own identity. And that's when I sort of built the home office, which some people have seen on various different podcasts and other recordings and things like that. It is a little distracting when you're on work calls, though, because people will start poking around at the backgrounds.
Oh yeah, I would be terrible. I do that all the time. If you don't have a background, like one of those virtual backgrounds, I try to see what's in your house. Snoopy.
What's that over there?
Yeah. I think one question I have is, you said you are a generalist, which I like to say that I am as well because I work in security and it's kind of, there's so many different things. Do you ever feel like being a quote unquote generalist makes you feel like it's harder to find a place to fit in your career, or has it made easier where you actually find there's more spaces that you fit? I don't know.
I think it's a little bit of both. For the organizations and the people that can appreciate a generalist, which I'll explain in a second why I call myself that, I think it's easier because people that are truly looking for a legitimate generalist are really looking for people like me. Otherwise, I'm pigeonholing myself into a particular role. And for me, that's not a place I really want to be. So I had a very large org, a couple years ago, contact me and say, hey, we want you to take over this big chunk of our business. And it's very specific to the voice market. And it was a great opportunity. But I looked at it and I said, it's this narrow sliver of technology that you're going to want me to work in. And I'm like, that's probably going to be really fun for a couple of years. And then I'm going to get bored. So the generalist role means that for me, I can change it up all the time, or it changes itself up. So that's why I really like that kind of a role. And also, I guess, playing a bit into the theme here, I guess I call myself a bit of a generalist because I don't really believe I'm that good at an awful lot of stuff. I'm kind of dangerous at some stuff. And just as an example, like I'm not a CCIE. I'm not even a CCNP. I've never gotten those certifications before, only because I didn't have or didn't want to spend the time to get those things. I respect people that have done that for the very reason. But yeah, that's so a bit of it is because I just don't focus on the one technology that much.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm in the same boat where a lot of times I saw it as a weakness. I couldn't focus on one thing so deeply. I could learn something really well, but then I would get bored and I'd move on. So I always thought it was a weakness, but it's only recently in my career that I was like, actually, it's been a huge benefit because now I have, even if I've got some depth of knowledge here, I've got such a vast knowledge of all these other concepts that I can kind of connect the dots or find the right person. But it took me a long time to view that as an asset versus a not so positive thing. The other thing I was going to say is one of the questions we ask the people we have on here is, what do you do? Like, what's your actual hands-on, like day to day? This is the type of things that I do. You've got a very interesting job, so I'd love to hear that as well.
So my existing job, which is innovation architect, is really broad. So there's a couple things that I'm responsible for. So I'm responsible for the physical day-to-day operations of our lab facility, which currently has just me in it. But we provide services to people all around the company, specifically around things like AI and machine learning and stuff like that and other things. And they'll commonly come to me and say, hey, this stuff we're trying to build isn't working. Do you have any ideas why it's not working? And then I'll dig into it. We also have customers who want to do things that they can't figure out how to do. So they have a problem and we'd like to solve this somehow. And I have the open ability to help them solve that problem no matter what it takes. So whether it uses a product that we have, or I have to go out and get something else, or I have to build something from scratch, or build some kind of hardware, or figure out how to write some code, which I'm not very good at, whatever it takes to sort of try to help them. And then ideally make that repeatable so that we can solve that problem for other people, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So I have a very open mandate to do almost anything that I feel can provide a positive impact to the company and our customers. That's the extent of our mandate right now. So it's very broad. I mean, it doesn't mean I can sit and play with toys all day and not achieve anything. So there has to be some goal at the end of the day. But that's what we're trying to do, is trying to help customers and partners do new things and solve new problems.
That's really cool. That definitely sounds very exciting and is something I think a lot of us would like to aspire to get to. Before we ask you, how do we get this job? I first want to know, with that being kind of fairly deep, even though it is a generalist role, it's fairly deep in the weeds of technology. So I'm kind of curious, what does your family think you do? What are your kids or your wife or your mom, like, what do they think your job is?
Oh my goodness. Well, I have to go back in history a little bit for what my parents think I do, because I've actually been working in the same industry as my parents my father for some time. My kid being, she's 5, so I think she thinks I just solve the world's problems, and I just make stuff work. And, my wife has a hard time understanding what I do. I mean, she knows what I do at the Innovation Center, and she knows the problems we've solved and the things that we've done. And she knows basically, I just make tech work, whatever that tech happens to be. And that really is a great way to explain what I do. It's just take tech and solve problems with no specific boundaries. The no boundaries part to what I do is the best part, right? That's totally what's the best part of what I do. It doesn't matter if it's, wireless stuff, security stuff. I don't do a lot of network, but I do a ton of other things, but I don't do network.
Well, there's plenty of people at Cisco to do networking stuff, so that's probably fine.
That stuff's kind of table stakes at Cisco. Like if you talk to anybody here who does, maybe they do servers, maybe they do apps, maybe they do security. Like everyone just kind of assumes network. Yeah. They're like, yeah, like if you work at Cisco, the network stuff's something that everyone's got to know to a certain extent. But as technology has changed, as I've been here, I have had to pick up new skills and figure out new things. And, as things are moving and as something starts to get more visible in my day to day, I'll say, okay, I think I need to learn a little bit about this more. And then I'll sort of go down a rabbit hole of learning.
Yeah. I noticed that you have 1 or 2 Kubernetes certifications.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming those were similar to what you're just describing, right? There's rabbit holes you had to go down to be able to make stuff work.
That's exactly what that is. Yeah, exactly. So was it last year? Yeah. So last year, We were doing a ton of Kubernetes stuff within the incubation group at Cisco, and I kept running into a lot of Kubernetes stuff all the time, and I was having to troubleshoot stuff. And then we had a couple new products that were being developed around Kubernetes. So I decided that I wanted to get my certification done. But here's the thing. I hadn't done one in a while. I hadn't done a certification in a while. And I knew that I would probably procrastinate and have a hard time getting it done. So what I did was I came up with a way to get it. I kind of built a program. Here's how we're going to do the training. Here's how I'm going to write the test. And then I went to a bunch of coworkers and said, who wants to do this with me? Because I knew if I do this with a bunch of other people, I couldn't fail because then I would look bad. Like I'm the guy who set it up and I would look horrible. So what I did was I dragged people along with me. Actually, I didn't drag. They came along with me. And I knew that I couldn't fail now because it would be embarrassing. So I kind of brought them along for that ride. And we did a 1 month, like intense, like 4 hours a night thing for the CKA program. And then we all went and wrote it and all of us got it. So I try to remember, I think it was half a dozen people. We all went and wrote it at the same time, basically within a couple of days of each other. And we all got it. We all passed. So that was a super huge achievement. It was the first major technical thing I'd done in a while. And for anybody listening who's interested in learning about Kubernetes, just go and get your CKA because you'll learn it in that process. So
I love that. Peer pressure for success.
yeah, totally.
Oh, that's amazing. That is definitely me. I procrastinate and I get overwhelmed. I don't like exams. So I'm more than happy to do all the training, but I hate the exam. So actually, that's probably a really good approach. I might steal that for future attempts.
Yeah. Well, I'm 42. So, it's been a long time since I was in that world of like hammering out exams. In my late 20s, like people were challenging me to go out and write tech exams. They're like, you should just write this one without even studying for it. And I would just go and write it and pass it without studying, right? I can't do that now. I could do it then.
Sounds like a nightmare to me.
Oh, yeah. Like I wrote, the first one that I ever did for that was it was like A+, like way, way, way back. I wrote my A+ thing. And I think the only questions I got wrong were like, what chemical do you use to clean a line printer or something?
Brilliant. Well, we met. Oh, when did we meet? We met in 2015, didn't we? It was at Cisco Live, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And when we met, either you were a Cisco champion then or you became one after. I can't remember that one.
I think I was at Cisco champion at that point.
Okay. So you went from Cisco champion to Cisco employee. Obviously, you're not a champion now. But we still get to chat with you in that community, so that's fun.
Yeah, there's this like internal thing we have. We kind of call it the champion emeritus, like people who ended up as a Cisco employee. They let us hang around if we're nice.
Yeah, exactly. Do you think that kind of led you to your position now?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. I will say without question that I got the job partially because I was a Cisco champion and involved in that community, and absolutely got the job because I was involved with Cisco Live. 100%. I know for a fact. Now, just to go back one step, I was working for a Cisco partner who was, I was running a delivery team. So I was responsible for people doing installation and I was doing design and I was managing a group of people. And I loved it. It was really cool. Managing people was fun because unlike technology, people are not ones and zeros. They're totally squidgy and different and they're random a little bit. So it was really fun to help build the team. And then I saw this posting for the job I have now. And I looked at it and I went, there's no way this is real. I'm like reading the description and I'm like, this is a job? Like I can do all that like day to day. I'm like, I got to go and talk to these guys and see what the deal is. So I went and I spoke to the person who's now my boss. And I looked right at him. I said, are you like, you're seriously, this is what the gig is? And he's like, yeah. I'm like asking him a million questions. And I'm like, okay. So then I did some more digging. And then finally I said, okay, I threw my hat in the ring. And some of the recommendations I got were from people that I knew at Cisco as a result of being a part of Cisco Live and the Cisco Champion community. Those people wrote me recommendations and, that probably sealed the deal. So yeah, like I got the gig because of that.
Awesome. And I think, that goes back to that old saw, right? It's not what you know, it's who you know. And I think in tech, it's a little bit of both, right? You got to know the tech, but it helps to have some friends who you've met along the way and been kind to hold the door for you when you're coming along.
Well, I think in the world where there's a whole bunch of, resumes in a pile, right? I think sometimes it can help to just put yours on top or at a minimum allow somebody to say, that person's worth looking at, But at the end of the day, I mean, everybody's got to get it on their own merits.
Absolutely. And speaking of the merits, I think since you've been at Cisco now, you've been awarded a Global Ecosystem Champion Award. Is that right? Or is that before? What is that?
Yeah, there was a Global Ecosystem Champions was one that we got for sort of building up more innovation around the ecosystem of what we do. And we've done a bunch of different projects that we've received awards for within our department. So we've done some pretty neat stuff, some stuff that we're pretty proud of as a team. And it's been super fun to be able to do that stuff. Like there's some stuff that we do where you sort of get up in the morning, you're like, this makes me really happy to go to work. So as an example, the biggest one the last couple of years was we had a project called Digital Canopy, which is where we delivered internet service to 13,000 people in the city of Toronto for free during COVID because they were stuck at home and couldn't get to the library and couldn't get to places where they access internet service. And then recently, like a month ago, there was a study, a really good study that came out that outright said that our project was directly responsible for a 14% drop in COVID-19 infection.
Wow.
And I was like, darn, man, like that's pretty awesome. So that was one of the coolest projects. It wasn't about money. It was about helping people. It was legitimately about helping people, and we got to do it. So, it's stuff like that that makes me love what I do now.
Yeah, it's the internal motivation. It's the like feeling a part of something bigger and making a difference. That's definitely how I'm motivated. Well, it's how most people are motivated, but it's really cool to actually see that impact and see the benefits that you've yourself have been a part of. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I suppose if we started in the beginning of going into tech, why did you choose technology? Was it curiosity? Was it you just ended up here without even realizing? I don't know.
So I haven't talked about this really because, stuff falls off your resume after a while. So way back when I first started getting into tech, it was a summer job for me. So I had actually applied to go to college to take 3D animation art technology. So and I'm not a super artsy person, but I had been doing some 3D animation art with some friends. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. It's really fun. So I'd actually applied to get into a program and I never got into the program. They were very choosy. And the reason why I didn't get into the program was I had to pass a visual art test, like drawing stuff with a pencil. And I can't draw, like at all. At the time, I could build stuff in 3ds Max and build like cool animation and stuff, but I couldn't draw stuff. And as soon as I found out I have to draw stuff, I was like, forget it. I'm never getting into this thing. And I completely failed. So I took a summer job working at a telecommunications company that my dad was there. And I was working in the stock room. And some guy was like, hey, we need these like cables soldered. And it was like for music on hold for phone systems. So I was like, okay, so I did that. And then they were like, oh, and then I really wanted to get out of the stock room. And one guy was like, well, I need help pulling cable. So I was like, okay, I'll help you pull cable. I didn't know what I was doing. He taught me how to pull cable in ceilings and stuff. So the first part of my career, I sort of slowly worked my way towards working within the, traditional telecom area, working on stuff from Nortel, small phone systems and stuff like that. So I had done that for the whole summer, and it came time to sort of figure out what I was going to do with college again. And I kind of looked at it and went, well, I actually kind of enjoy what I'm doing. It seems to have a road to a career. I'm going to stick with this for another year and see where we end up. So I did. And then I ended up as a field technician. So I was, in my car driving around, fixing people's phones at businesses, pulling cable in ceilings, which I hated. Doing phone system installs and stuff like that. So I did that for a lot of years of the first part of my career. And then like mergers and acquisitions have been my life. I think I've been a part of 6 companies that have been acquired. It's horrible. And then I started working on PBX technology. So the bigger stuff made by Nortel, and the owner of the company that I worked for, who, by the way, I treated horribly. I was a kid and I never appreciated what this man did for me. I was like this punk kid that thought I knew everything. But he was like, I went to him because I wanted a raise. And he said to me, you know what? I'm not going to give you a raise, but we're going to send you for training instead. And I was like, okay. I went, sure. I mean, at the time, I should have been like, sweet. But I didn't know any better. He goes, but we'll send you for training and then you'll get to work on cooler stuff. And I'm like, okay. So I spent like an entire summer in Texas at Nortel getting training. Like this guy spent like $100,000 training me. I mean, it was as good as a college education over the course of a summer. And it was like learning how to work on big Nortel telecom equipment. And I learned how to do contact center and all this stuff. And I was like in my 20s and I was working ridiculous hours, just killing it. And that's where I started in the industry, was in TDM telecom. And it was interesting because here I am, this like, early 20s kid working in an industry with a whole bunch of people who are like late 30s. And they're all looking at me like, who's this kid working on this equipment? Like, why is he working on this stuff? So it was interesting. And that's where I was, by the way, the year 2000 switch in 99. I actually worked in a control center like overnight, waiting for the whole world to blow up at, January 1st. And nothing ever happened for us. But that was where I was. And then what happened was when Nortel started to die off and that equipment started to disappear, I had gotten into voice over IP because like I was a computer guy. I knew computer stuff and I fixed computer stuff around the office. So when voice over IP arrived, all the TDM telecom guys were all like, we don't understand this. What's this network thing? So you got to understand that back then, TDM telecom guys that worked on telephone systems, they were like, they didn't even know how to use a laptop. When a computer turned on, it had to like start Procom. If it didn't like auto start Procom, like the computer was broken to them. So when I worked on that stuff, I didn't know as much about TDM, but I knew a heck of a lot about computers. So when voice over IP showed up, it was like, this is a pretty natural switch, right? I had a bit of a leg up. So I had moved around a little while, and got myself in trouble a couple times, got fired, for being an immature brat, went back to selling computers in a retail store, which was horrible. And then I got another job. And then I started doing more. I worked for another company. I did some LAN and some WAN stuff. So I started learning that from this older networking guy who was there. And he kind of took me under his wing and taught me like LAN and WAN and frame relay and a couple things. So that was kind of neat. And then I got hired by this company called InfoStream many, many years ago. And the guy who hired me, who, by the way, I'm still very good friends with, he lives not far from me and we're still very good friends. They were a Cisco shop. And I'm like, I went to the interview. I was referred to them and I went to the interview and he goes, I said, hey man, like, I don't know anything about Cisco voice. Like, and he goes, yeah, but you know voice. So he goes, what I want you for is your Nortel knowledge, because we're going to rip out all those Nortel systems and you're going to help us do it. And I'm like, okay. He goes, I'll teach you the Cisco stuff. That's fine. So that was my first foray into like hardcore working at a Cisco company. So that's kind of how I made the switch.
That's awesome. That's a really cool story and quite a path. And I think it mirrors to some degree, right? Some of our paths of folks who are, I'm of a similar age as you are. And I definitely think that was kind of how you got into networking and IT at the time. I mean, it may be a little different now. Maybe it's not. I don't know. We'll talk to we'll talk to some other folks as well. I wonder though, throughout that, what was the worst job you've had up till this point? We know that the current job you've kind of reached at least a local maximum, right? And you're loving your work now. But what was the low spot along the way, or the lowest spot?
I mean, I don't know. There was a super low spot. I'm sure I hated some of them more than others, right? Or disliked some more than others. But I can't say there was a low spot, because every single one, even the ones I didn't like, I learned from those places. And I know that now. I didn't know that then necessarily. Even some of the leaders that I worked for that I liked less than other leaders, if I go back and I think about it now, I think, yeah, I didn't like that person at the time, maybe, but I learned from that person regardless. So I think that I don't have one that I like. I mean, I didn't like my retail jobs and like stuff like that, but I don't consider that as part of my career, like working in retail. Although everything you've ever done is the culmination of who you are as a professional. So I'm sure there's something that I know from working in retail electronic sales that, I remember to a certain extent, but I've tried to not continue doing things that I didn't really like for that reason, because if I didn't like it, I just wouldn't do it. Without having a college education, right? I would always go into trying to find something and be like, well, I don't have a college education. And I always thought that gave me a leg down. And for many years, it probably did, because I didn't have that, like, you look at the ads and it's like university education in blah, 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 or 5 years experience or X years experience, right? And I was like, man, if I can just get to that X years experience, then I qualify. But the biggest mistake I always had, and I always tell people this, they'll look at an ad, an ad for a gig, and they'll say, well, I don't meet this one requirement. And I'm like, just apply anyway. Like, a friend of mine applied for a tech support job at a company I was at, and he said, it says you have to have a high school diploma. I said, what part of having a high school diploma helps you be a tech support person? You know everything that they need. Don't worry about it. And he went for the interview, and did they even ask him about it? No, they didn't ask him about his high school diploma. come on, right? So I always tell people, just apply. If you like the job, apply for it. Like, maybe you'll get it. Maybe you have the skills they need, or the talent that they need, not the skills. And because those things, the things that matter. I mean, there's so many things HR puts on the thing, right, that don't matter. So yeah, my thing is, I'm always super worried. There's two things I'm always worried about. I'm like, am I good enough for that? I don't know. And then the other thing that I have I'll call it an irrational fear because everyone calls it. It's not an irrational fear because it's a legitimate fear, but everybody says it's irrational. I am constantly worried, always. I'm constantly worried I'm going to get fired next week, even when I've had a good week. Okay? Now, my boss now is an awesome guy. Like, I love the man to death. He's amazing. He's so nice to me. And he knows that he can't call me up on a Friday and be like, I need to talk to you. I need to talk to you Monday about something. I'm like, don't do that to me, man. Like, do you know what that does to my weekend when you're like, we need to talk on Monday? And I've called him up before and been like, no, we're talking right now because I'm not stewing all weekend.
I've done the same thing to my boss.
I always have this fear that I'm going to get canned. And everyone's like, but don't worry about it because if you did, you could like get a job tomorrow. I'm like, really? Show me that job that's waiting for me tomorrow, right? And so I don't talk about it a lot, but I am always afraid of being canned.
I have the same issue. Like my boss, even if he says, let's talk in an hour, I'm like, no, you need to tell me what it's about. If you book a meeting with you, you have to tell me the agenda. If you want to talk to me, you have to tell me the context. Otherwise, I panic. I used to have the problem where I would wait until I was absolutely panicking before I raised it to my boss that I was panicking. Now, when I'm feeling slightly overwhelmed, I have a quick catch up because then that allows me to kind of put my head in the right context. But no, I'm in the same boat. I'm like, no, they're going to fire me.
Have that conversation with your manager is what I tell anybody, right? That feels like that. Like this is a struggle for me that I have tried to manage. It is it's a stressor and an case of anxiety for me that I have to manage. And I manage it now by working with my supervisor to sort of say, look, and I've told him, I just tell him I feel that way. And he's like, it's fine. He's like, it might seem fine to you, but like, it's not for me.
Mm-hmm.
And, he's really good about it. So now he'll say, hey, can you talk at 3:00? Everything's fine. He'll like capitalize it,
Yeah. Yeah, but I think that's part of managing upward, isn't it? If you want to do your job well, you have to manage people below you, but you also have to manage people above you and manage expectations, right? And I think for me, I have to do that because if my boss tells me we need to talk, I 100% believe the world is on fire, I am fired, and it's the end of the world. Like, I don't know.
But is that the sign? Is that the sign for imposter syndrome? Like, legitimately, like you think? Because when people say to me, they're like, "Oh, you could get a job tomorrow." I'm like, really? Who's that person that's waiting to hire me? And I think I'm going to get fired all the time. Like, is that the number one sign of imposter syndrome? I don't know.
I don't know, because I think for me, it's because I don't think I'm good enough. That's why I struggle with. I'm clearly the worst. There's so many better people out there. I have no idea what I'm doing. And that's why I think I'm going to be fired. So maybe that's why, I don't know.
So I can tell you this. I've worked in two situations. So I've worked in a situation where I was the smartest person in the room on a particular topic, not every topic, but on particular topics. I was the lead person. There was no one who knew more than me about a particular topic in the room, in the organization, because it was a small company. It was usually the startups that I've worked for. I've worked for a couple. And first of all, I'll tell you this, being the only person with a skill set in a startup is boring as heck, because like, who do you talk to bounce ideas off your head? Right. By the way, which is why I love the champion community, because I can always find people who like, hey, just like validate my thinking. So there's no imposter syndrome when you're the only person in the room with all of that, because you're the only one. Right now, let's go and flip the other way. Okay, I work, obviously, where I work now, we have like distinguished engineers that have like invented protocol. Like, I mean, how am I supposed to, sometimes you look at that and you're like, how am I ever going to measure up to that? Right. But, as some of my mentors have told me, they're like, everyone has their own benefits that they bring to the table. Maybe that person spent their whole life working on that one thing and they don't have the breadth of experience you have. And I'm like, is that my college degree? Is that my university degree? Is the fact that I've done all this stuff in all these other areas, so I have a perspective? I don't think so. Like, for me, that doesn't stack up. Like, does that stack up as, skill to somebody with a CCA? I don't know.
I think when I talk to you, it feels like even if you don't know a topic, you have so much experience, you know where to find more and you know how to learn, And I know that there's a lot of people that I've spoken to that are really, really good at one thing, like really good, like bloody impressive, but they can't go past that thing. This is my thing. This is what I'm good at. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I do think that there is a skill, there is an ability that you have that not everybody has that I think is really impressive. And it's the ability to think outside the box. I know that sounds really stupid, but it is that ability. I mean, in your job, you look at, here's the problem. How do I find the solution? It's not, let me Google this. It's, I have to create a solution. That's not happened before,
Nah, there's a lot of Googling.
Well, yeah.
No, there's a lot of Googling.
But you're able to put things together. I mean, that's my job too. Half my job is on Google. but I do think that makes a difference. Yeah.
Pulling those things together, right? I think that, when you're a super deep expert in one thing, you get that hammer problem, right? Where everything looks like a nail because you've kind of turned your mind into a hammer, which is great, right? As long as you hang around with a lot of nails. And we need hammers, right? I mean, we need a lot of that. But I think, to your point, Zoe, I think the counterpoint is, knowing how to learn, knowing how to synthesize information, knowing how to pull things together quickly into new things is another just as good skill, I think.
So I think the pathway that people have taken, if you look at career path for a second, right? So career path for me has been a little bit broken compared to what a lot of people do in the industry. So, a lot of people see working for a manufacturer as like the holy grail. That's where I want to be, is working for some manufacturer. They see that as top tier, or maybe working for a service provider or whatever, is top tier, whatever is top tier for them, right? Some people come out of school and they'll get a job at a manufacturer right out of school, right? I personally think that's a mistake. Not to say negative things about my coworkers who came out of school and immediately started working for a manufacturer. They have their own path. For what I do, for the things I want to do, I don't believe that's a super great path. When I started working for what we call an interconnect back in the day, and now we call it, some people call it a VAR, right? Value-added reseller, company that resells other people's stuff and installs it. But there was a perspective I didn't have working for a VAR, and that was being a customer. So when things were going not awesome at the VAR I was working for, who was also a service provider at the time, they had done a reorg, which I've been through so many reorgs, it's crazy. They had reorged, and the new org I was in, they wanted me to sell MPLS service. They're like, we want you to sell MPLS services. And I'm like, that sounds boring. So at the time, I had a customer had come to me and said, hey, if you ever want to leave, you should talk to us. And I was like, oh, okay, let's talk. So I worked for a company that manufactured ice cream. Literally, that's what they did. And they were building a new plant facility because they had a disaster. And I was like their field engineer. So I started working there as a IT director. And that was the first time I was ever a customer. And being that I had been at a VAR, it actually gave me some cool skill because, the stuff I knew from working at a VAR, I could apply to work in there. But it was very different being a customer. And it felt like a step down in my career. And I was always very worried. I'm like, oh man, this is a step down. Like everyone wants to get out of a customer, go to a VAR, or get out of a customer, go to a service provider. And I'm like, I have made 2 steps down. But at the time, it sounded like a cool opportunity. So I was like, let's go with it. Now, luckily, a friend of mine contacted me a couple years in and was like, hey, we got this startup going. We're doing like virtualized like data centers and stuff, which I had never done. And he's like, we need your network and security stuff because no one for this company knows that stuff. And all the guys said the project we did with you was awesome. You were great at that. So do you want to come work for us doing that? And at the time I was like, I'm kind of done doing what I'm going to do here. So yeah, let's go and do that. So I was like, oh man. So I went back and worked for that startup. And it was the first startup I'd ever worked for. Yeah. And it was startup life. I mean, for anybody that's done it, startup life is crazy in all areas. And then after doing that for a while, I got an opportunity to go back to a VAR who was opening in the east part of Canada. They were very much on the West Coast. They wanted to open in the East Coast. And I had a bunch of friends who were there. And I was like, oh. So I went and met with them. And that was cool. And we went from like, I think when I started, we had like 6 employees. And when I left, we had like 100 something in the East Coast. We had built up this pretty cool team, which was awesome. But, I was sort of making my way back up from customer back to VAR, because I figured that was the hit, where I wanted to go. And I always wanted to work where I'm working now. It was kind of like the Holy Grail, was the place I wanted to be. But I always never felt that I was going to fit in there, or here for that matter, until I found this thing. But I still go to work every day with the anxiety of, am I gonna get canned? And my boss will say, you're crazy. I don't know why you think that. But that's my stressor. I don't have a university degree. I don't have a college degree. I'm just bouncing around the industry, trying to get things done for the companies I work for and make my customers happy. And that's it. That's all I've got, right? I've got I also, I have my CKA. You guys brought that up before, right? I have that. That's the first cert I've done in like over 10 years. So I'm not very certified. I don't have a university degree. I'm constantly sitting here thinking, if I lose my job tomorrow, I'm going to be homeless. Like I'm not going to be able to feed my family. But seriously, it's not even a joke. And that's my stressor. And you would think that would make me like work harder because I'm worried about it, but it doesn't. I just get anxiety about it, and I just freeze up. And sometimes I don't sleep. And sometimes, I'll say to my wife, I'm like, oh man, something's going wrong at work. I think I'm going to lose my job. And I get all stressed out about it. Everyone says I'm crazy, but that doesn't fix how I feel about it. And I felt this way my entire career because I don't have the paper. I don't have the paper to prove what I can do.
Mm-hmm. That's literally the only reason I went to college.
It's a good reason.
For that paper.
It really is.
Well, I'm still paying off the debt, so.
Was it worth it? Is the question, right?
Oh yeah, I've never really talked about that. I've never really talked about the fact that like I live with this irrational fear. Well, I mean, everybody else says it's irrational, but I live with this fear of I don't have the receipts if I lose my job to prove that I'm any good.
But I do think you take the right approach, though, in the sense of you communicate that with your boss, because it's not something you can solve. It's not something you can get rid of. It's something that you have to address.
I can say this, it doesn't matter the company you're at, whether they're good or bad. What matters is the person that you work for. Because I've worked for some pretty horrible places that people hated. But my direct supervisor, my boss, was so awesome that they made it good. I also know people who've worked for really great companies that had a horrible manager, a horrible boss. And they're like, that company stinks. They're like, I hate it there. But really, it's not the company that they hate. It's really just their manager they don't like. I'm going to just say this. When I managed people for the first time, I was like trying to figure out, oh my God, I have to manage people. What am I going to do? I read this awesome book. I listened to an awesome audiobook. I wish I could say I can't sit down and read books. I just don't have that much attention span. There's a book written by a guy named Marcus Buckingham, and it's called First Break All the Rules. What, I don't know, thousands of managers do differently that make them successful or something. And it was like this science-based management book, and they did all this research. I am totally in love with that methodology. And if you manage people, go and listen to that book because it will teach you some amazing things about how to manage people effectively and how to find great people. And that was one of the things I've always watched is like, or listened to, is how that guy talks about managing people is super good. Because there is a way to manage people that can get the best out of them. And then there's ways that don't work. And managers, the difference between happy teams that get a lot done and poor teams is not the company, but the manager.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true. And I think, looking back at your career, I think one thing we can say, or maybe my observation is that nothing's permanent, right? You thought you took some steps down, you brought those steps back up, and now you've made it to this dream job. Unfortunately, just like jobs in our careers, this podcast is also not permanent, and it is time to wrap up for today. So thanks for joining us, Justin, and sharing your story with the Imposter Syndrome Network. This was awesome. Really appreciate it. I think it's a really, really neat look behind the curtain of a really, really successful person who has a really long and illustrious career to understand that there is that anxiety there that a lot of others feel, that all of us feel at some times. So I really appreciate you being honest and open with us on this. Really cool treat for the listeners. And yeah, to all you imposters out there listening, we know that your time and attention are the most valuable things you have, and we really appreciate you spending them with us. Thank you. Don't forget to subscribe so you can catch the next episode when it comes out on Tuesday. And if you haven't already, please feel free to join us on LinkedIn. We have a group for conversations about all things related to our careers and lives in technology. Justin, are there any projects you're working on or involved in that the Imposter Network should be aware of?
I don't know of any specific ones. I mean, we have some great stuff that we did. We did our massive public Wi-Fi project. That was awesome. We're working on inclusive innovation programs now, trying to do some new stuff. I don't know. Oh my God. I don't know if I can talk about those on the podcast or not. There's so many things we're working on that I can and cannot talk about. But all I can say is the projects that we work on are really cool. If you follow me on Twitter, I talk about the ones that I'm allowed to talk about. Go and find that thing that makes you happy and just keep doing it.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin. We'll have links in the show notes as well to your Twitter and maybe anything else if there's a public site where folks can find information on what you're working on there in the lab. And that's it. We'll be back next week.
A good interviewer friend of mine, he always said, don't talk to the person you're interviewing before you start. They'll give it all up before you hit record. He goes, I don't want to be rude. Like, seriously, I'm not being rude. He goes, let's not talk right now. Because I know you'll give something up.